Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Irene and I am a registered dietitian. So today I wanted to talk about how I got my first job as a dietitian. This is something that I feel like I wish I had some guidance in when I just finished my internship and was preparing to take the RD exam. So I thought it might be helpful to someone out there that may be finishing up their internship now or maybe in the middle of it and thinking about how to get their first job. So today I am going to be telling you about my experience, how I interviewed for jobs, and how I got my first job. So for context, the reason why I think that I am remotely qualified to even talk about this topic is because during the last couple of weeks of my internships, I actually did interview for 2 positions and got both jobs, even though I had not even passed or taken the RD exam yet, and I was just an intern with basically no experience. So I feel like I am just a tiny bit qualified to speak on this topic. So the first thing when it comes to job searching and looking for a new job is the application process. So the first tip that I would give you is to start early. If you know that you want to start working right after your dietetic internship, you should probably start looking at least 1 to 2 months before your internship ends. This is because the timeline can be kind of long for, the hiring process. So you may submit an application and it may take 1 or 2 weeks for a hiring manager or recruiter to get back to you to schedule an interview, and then it may take like another week or so for that interview to actually happen. And then once that's happened, it usually takes about 2 or 3 weeks before they give you a decision. And once you do get a decision, if you decide to proceed with that job, it's gonna take probably another 3 to 4 weeks for the whole onboarding process, to do a drug screen, a background check, and things like that before you actually get hired. So if you're wanting to work right after, you can imagine that this process may take a pretty long time. The second tip that I would give is to try and apply for all of the jobs at once. Like, pick one weekend where you can kind of clear everything out and just submit a bunch of applications. This is because most jobs kind of like follow the same timeline, so you never want to be like too far apart from the times that you apply for a job, because then that might mean that once you get to the decision-making portion of it, there may actually be like a 2 to 3 week gap in between when you receive the decision for one job and then the decision for another job. So you never want to kind of have that like buyer's remorse where you say yes to the first job because that's the only one that you've gotten so far, and then 2-3 weeks later you find out that you actually got the other job too, and that may have been a better fit for you, but it's just that the timelines didn't match up. You've already signed a contract with the first job, so you can't get out of it, etc. It's a whole big headache. So your best bet is going to be to try and apply to all of the jobs at the same time. So now that we kind of got the logistics out of the way, let's talk about the job application. If you're using a website like LinkedIn or Indeed, they might have a lot of like really easy ways to apply, where like you can just submit a resume and then maybe answer a couple more questions and then the application is done. Other places, they might be a little bit more complicated. You might have to fill out kind of like a lot of paperwork, so that may take a lot of time, especially when it's like you're doing the same thing over and over, because everyone pretty much needs to ask the same questions on the application, and then some of them may also have an extra assessment that you need to complete. A lot of them might have several parts to the application process, so make sure you go through all of the parts. But one thing that I would say is kind of in common with all of the jobs is that most hiring managers and recruiters will look at your resume first to determine if you will kind of move on to the next step. So you want to make sure that your resume is really like crisp and clean. It's easy to read, it's easy to follow. Don't go crazy with the fonts or anything. Like Times New Roman is perfect. Don't add in lots of like pictures or random decorative things, it's really not necessary. I do know like some people, when they're looking at resumes, they're actually very particular about how they look, and if they don't like the way that it looks, they kind of just toss it. That's pretty extreme. Like most people I don't feel like are like that. A lot of people don't really care as long as they can read it, but you definitely want to highlight like your strengths and then make it easy on the eyes, especially because a lot of these places may have a lot of resumes to look through, and you don't want to make them have to take extra time to kind of try and read what you wrote, because I feel like chances are they're not actually going to take that extra time, and they might just, you know, toss it in the recycling bin. Once you have finished with the application process, you are joining the waiting game now. So you might start to get a couple of rejection emails in the first couple of days, but also keep an eye out for any additional assessments that maybe they'll send after like the initial review. Then once everything is sort of completed, hiring managers or recruiters may reach out with what's called a pre-screen, and sometimes it's like a phone call where they'll just like call you for like 10 or 15 minutes and kind of talk about this position and ask you what you're kind of looking for in this position. That's just sort of to make sure that you are the right person for this position. Like if you are applying for a position and you're looking for a full-time job, but this position is actually going to be a part-time job, you know, you may not be a really great fit, and you know, they can kind of end your application there and save them and you a lot of time. So that's kind of one of the reasons why they have a pre-screen. I've also had experiences where like the hospital will actually send you like a Word document, and that's the pre-screen. So you kind of just like fill it out and send it back to them, and then like that's it. So it kind of depends on the specific place if they do have a pre-screen or if they don't, or how they want to do or conduct their pre-screen. So once you pass the pre-screen, you're pretty much like 75% there. The main thing that they're looking for in like a job interview is that you know what you're doing and that you have adequate communication skills. So these days interviews can be conducted over Zoom or in person. I've had one of each actually, and regardless of which type of interview you have, you want to make sure that you are dressed for the job. That doesn't mean you have to show up in a suit or anything, but at minimum business casual. And if you're not really sure what the dress code is, or you know, is business casual too casual or anything like that, feel free to shoot the recruiter or hiring manager an email and ask them about the dress code. That's totally okay, and it shows that you're interested in the position. So I feel like that's not going to dock you any points. During the interview, of course, you also want to make sure that you have really good posture. If it is via Zoom, you also want to make sure that the lighting is good and you're not like in some really dark, dingy space. You want to make sure that it's not noisy, or that you have like a really like nice background. So each interview could go a little differently. I know between the two interviews that I had, they both went like drastically different, and those are the two experiences that I'm going to be speaking to in this video. And for context, I did interview for clinical positions, like that's what I wanted to go into. If you are not interviewing for a clinical position, this might go a little bit differently, or completely differently, to be honest. So that being said, an interview can go a couple of different ways, and sometimes like there are also multiple parts to an interview. It kind of depends on your specific site, but more likely than not, at the beginning of an interview, the hiring manager or recruiter will ask you to tell them about yourself. So definitely be sure that you have a sort of elevator pitch ready. If you are a new grad, you can just tell them where you went to school, where you did your dietetic internship, and what you're kind of looking for in your dietetic career. And then they'll usually move on to like the behavioral questions. So most interviews will kind of have like a behavioral and a clinical part. The behavioral part will kind of ask you questions like, think about a time when this happened and tell me about it, or if you were in this situation, what would you do? Things like that. And the Academy of Dietetics actually has like a list of these sorts of questions, and you can look through them and like practice some of them. They may not be the exact same ones that you get on your interview, but I feel like it's kind of good to think through some of these scenarios. So this part where they are asking kind of the behavioral questions, it could be done with either like the whole team or just like the lead and the hiring manager, or it could be like split into two where they just do like the lead and hiring manager in one section and like peers in another section, which is what happened during one of my interviews. And I feel like that was really nice because I got to know like some of the people that I could potentially be working with, and we got to talk a lot more about their experiences, and I didn't have like the pressure of a manager sitting there watching me in my every move. So that was kind of nice, but you really don't know how some of these hospitals structure them, and there's just so many ways, I guess, that you can conduct an interview. So the second part of the interview is probably going to test your clinical knowledge and skills, and one of the hospitals that I interviewed at did this verbally. So they asked me questions like, tell me who is at risk for repeating syndrome and what you would look out for if someone is at risk, or questions like, what diet would you put a patient with partial bowel obstruction on if they're about to have surgery in 2 days, or kind of questions like that. And some of the questions do have like a specific answer, but some of them may be like just testing to see what your critical thinking skills are and things like that. If there is an answer that you don't know, don't worry about it, or try not to worry about it while you're in the interview. It's totally okay to not know everything, especially if you're just fresh out of your dietetic internship and you haven't taken your RD exam yet. So what you can do instead is tell them like the parts that you do know or what you think the answer might be, and then tell them where you would go to look for the answer and where you would go to kind of fact check yourself before you proceed with an intervention or whatever the question is asking. So the other hospital that I interviewed at actually had a take-home like worksheet for the clinical portion, and that one was mostly just like tube feeding questions, calculating needs, and that sort of thing. So for that, I was able to kind of like sit at home and take my time working on it, and also like flip through my textbook to make sure like I had the right things down and things like that. So kind of like what it might be like if you were like actually a dietitian starting out, like you're still able to like Google things before you submit it. But of course, your interview could go drastically different from mine. I mean, my 2 interview experiences were very different. Don't be freaked out if your interview doesn't turn out like this. I'm just giving some of my experiences and some of the ways that hospitals may conduct their interviews. But after you have interviewed, it may take 2 or 3 weeks for them to get back to you with a decision. Don't worry during this time period. Just sit tight and relax, I guess. The interview is already over. There's nothing you can do to change it. So all you're waiting for now is the decision. But if it has been a while since you've kind of like heard from them, they said that they would contact you after a week, and it's been 2 weeks now, you're wondering if they forgot you, it's totally okay to send like a follow-up email and ask them like kind of where they are in the process and how long it might be before you hear a decision. That is totally okay. And this is actually kind of one of the reasons why you kind of want to start early, because this process may take a pretty long time. But it is also important to kind of note here that some hospitals also do require that you have your RD license before they can hire you, or before like you can start on your first day. The 2 that I interviewed for actually did require this, so that is something to also keep in mind if you were expecting to start right away. That may not be possible for some specific hospitals. Fortunately, I took a job where I had actually interned at. It wasn't a place that I interviewed for, and they did not require me to have my license, and so that's why I was able to work like pretty much right away. But not all sites are like that, so you really have to kind of read the description and also ask them during the interview if that's something that could be possible. I know some places do give you like 3 months or 6 months to take your test and everything, but other places may not allow that. When getting your offer, most hiring managers will probably call you to give you your offer. So once you have this verbal offer, you can kind of start to negotiate salary. So up until this point, they probably haven't really disclosed how much they usually will pay their dietitians. So now would definitely be a really good time to ask. And once they tell you, if you're happy with it, you can definitely accept the offer. But if you are not, if it was a little bit lower than what you were expecting, you can definitely negotiate. If you're also kind of waiting to hear back from other jobs, you can let them know like, thank you for the offer. I would like a couple of days to, think this over, or, I actually have another offer right now and I'm kind of going back and forth between the 2, or something like that. And this is kind of why like applying for all of your jobs at the same time is really important, because it's more likely that you'll have them all like coming in around the same time and you'll be able to compare offers and things like that. But let's say that you only have one offer. You know, congratulations, still, you still got a job. You know, getting your first job is probably the hardest job that you will ever get. You know, once you have that first job, once you have like some experience under your belt, it gets easier from there. So don't be worried if you only have one offer, and don't be afraid to negotiate too if this is your only offer. So I feel like the field of dietetics tends to underpay their dietitians, so you should definitely advocate for yourself, and you can use data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics or other websites such as Glassdoor and PayScale to kind of gauge how much you think you should be making, and you can also show this information to your employers. Of course, this data is not always super accurate. Some of them have like huge ranges, and it also really depends on where you live, the cost of living, and things like that. So some of them may also overestimate while others may underestimate. So it's important to kind of be careful with some of these numbers, and, you know, kind of maybe ask around if other people are comfortable with sharing how much they make. I know money can be a touchy subject, and I mean, I personally do not feel comfortable sometimes sharing how much I make. But if someone is comfortable with sharing, you know, maybe a preceptor or something like that, how much they made when they first started out, of course, you know, adjusting for inflation and things like that, you may be able to get a better idea of how much you should be expecting to make. So once you kind of come up with your number, you kind of want to add a little bit of extra padding, because you never know what someone will say yes to. So for example, let's make this really easy, and let's say that the number that you've come up with is like $10 an hour, which should not be what you're getting paid as a dietitian, but we're using that as an example. So if that is what you want to get paid, maybe tell your employer that you want $13 an hour, you know, and they may say yes, and that would be amazing. But they may also say no, but we can give you like $11.50. So they may sort of like meet you in the middle or something like that, or, you know, somewhere in there. It really depends on how the hospitals run, you know, what they're okay with paying people, what their budget is like that year. You know, you never know. There's so many things that go into it. But giving a higher number may get you actually more than you thought that you could get. So definitely try. If it doesn't work, that's okay. If salary and wage is not something that they are willing to kind of compromise on, you can also ask if they may be willing to give you other things like a sign-on bonus or relocation, if they could pay for other things like your licensing fee or your exam or continuing education and things like that. That might also save you a couple $100s. But once you have kind of settled on your compensation, you can officially accept your offer in writing, and then HR will probably get with you to move on to the next steps. So this whole process usually takes about like 2 to 4 weeks, depending on where you are going to be working and like how extensive all this stuff is. And then you get to start your new job as a dietitian. And then lastly, before you start working as a dietitian, it is probably a good idea to get professional liability insurance. So this will cover you against claims of negligence in case something happens. And I believe that it was like about $70 to cover up to $1 million in claims. If you're not really sure what provider is reputable, you can definitely look at the Academy of Dietetics. They do offer like member pricing with some of the companies, but I don't remember seeing like a huge price difference between like a member and non-member. So once you have your RD license, your state license if you need it, and your liability insurance, you are good to go. And I wish you the best of luck as a new dietitian. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to tell me in the comments down below. Give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!